Perfectly good fonts are being senselessly ruined every single day by simple mistakes. It's a crime against design, but together we can prevent this. Here's 12 ways to ruin a good font. Number 1, stretch it. Fonts are designed by brilliant type designers who have real skill in crafting typefaces. You can see in this example, on the first row, we have 4 different widths from a typeface, and each of those are individually drawn. Then on the bottom, number 3 is the same size, but then I've used the width number 3 and I've just stretched it to be the same width as each of the options above, and you can see that these weird funky sort of things start to happen. If we go over to the far left with number 1, you can see that the vertical stem of the E is narrower than it should be. You can see it's a bit wider on the top, and similarly but not quite as pronounced there on number 2. Also with the shape of the S, it creates an odd sort of shape instead of the more elegant forms of the top, where the weighting of everything is proper. You see also with the T that same problem, where the vertical stem is narrower than it should be in relation to the horizontal bar on top. On the far right as well, it's ugly. The S, number 4, the spine of it doesn't have that elegant swoop that we have on the top, and again the E and the T get moved out of proportion. Stretching fonts ruins them and breaks them. Like every rule, it's there to be broken, as I talked about in a recent video. It's just about doing that with intention, and that's my whole approach, to learn the rules and then break them. That's why we're here. So this recent project by Only Studio, just from down the road from me in the northwest of England, but they created this for Pirate, who are rehearsal studios and radio space in sort of music relating to up-and-coming artists. And what they've done is they've used Arial, again a very default font, not the most elegant font, not the most rarefied font, kind of a little bit ridiculed. It's like the poor man's Helvetica, and they've deliberately stretched it through all these different applications, so it just looks wrong. Like, look at the H there on Hackney Wick on the far right. Look here on the E's, we're seeing this problem that we talked about, where we've got these horizontal bars that are far thicker than the vertical stems, and just the how the stroke weight on the C and the O has been totally messed up. And through all these posters and social applications and different things, you can see it's, you know, really makes these fonts look super ugly. But the clever thing about it is that this is very deliberate, and because they've unified other elements, because it's mainly black and white and this sort of point of view photography that's a little bit desaturated, it has a holistic look to the whole thing. And it also means that they can get away with breaking this rule, because the website, the brand, sorry, is called Pirate. It fits with it. It fits with this sort of DIY aesthetic that's very rough and ready. So it actually produces a desired effect. But in general, it creates all these kind of problems, and stretching fonts is something you want to avoid. Number 2, inappropriate situation. It might be a good font, but you're using it in the wrong context. This Google font Ultra can work really well in this little mock-up that I've created for this vegan restaurant. But if we were to apply it to something like Swiss watches, it just doesn't fit in the scenario. And if we move to something that is more what we would expect to see in this category, you can see how it doesn't offend, it doesn't stand out, and it really is just much more appropriate choice. So it might be a good font, that doesn't mean it's good in every situation. For example, you wouldn't use a script type on a road sign. Number 3, insufficient contrast. So this can be both the weight of the font, so because the top example here is a very light weight, at this size for body copy it's difficult to read. That's rectified in the second one. The bottom one is the same as the second, but obviously the background color changing just means the contrast is super low. Now, you might think this is an extreme example, but it's something you see on websites all the time where type is difficult to read, and it's not something that you have to fight with. Just use a contrast checker. This free one here is one that you can use. There's our bottom example, and then our middle example, you can see green means very good. It's much better. And There's also one for Adobe. You can get plugins for Figma, so you can have this with you while you're working, but there's no excuse for it really. There needs to be sufficient contrast with the color of the type, as in the thickness of it, and also the actual color that you choose for your background and to set the font in. Number 4, ill-considered point sizes. We have to think about these things deliberately. So our body copy shouldn't be too small to read, nor too large to read comfortably. And if you're designing a website, you need to make sure you check that, test that across all different screen sizes. And then having some sort of relationship. When you've got too many font sizes on a website, on a poster, in a catalog, it just starts to look strange. It starts to look disordered, and there's a little clashing. So just having a set number of sizes or a set relationship between the sizes, like a geometrical or a mathematical relationship, really help. Even the standard sizes that you get in, you've seen it in a word processor, you see it in your design software where it's like 6, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 18, might be 21 in there, or 24, 36, 48, 60, 72. That's based on the actual when type was a physical thing that typesetters used to lay out. They were the sizes, the point sizes they'd have in their case. But they're useful because there's actually a relationship there between them, and I think a lot of digital designers often throw around all these different weird point sizes, and it can lead to a little bit of a mess. So try and have some order to your point sizes. Number 5, unsuitable tracking. So tracking is the space between all the characters on a line. So you can see at the top, wider tracking, that's 200, and the second line there we have narrower tracking on 10. And when you track lowercase type widely, it looks odd, it's difficult to read. So I would start with 0 for body copy, or all your type really, and then just adjust it accordingly. Does it need to go a little bit narrower? Like, the general rule is the larger your type, the tighter the tracking wants to be. You want to pull that in a little bit because the spaces in between the characters look larger as the type actually point size increases. So something to look at, but I often see this widely tracked body copy type on websites. Makes it really difficult to read. Don't do that. Widely tracked type, I think only maybe for uppercase in logos, in certain headlines and things like that, can be acceptable. Number 6, substandard kerning. So whereas tracking is the space between all the characters on a line, kerning is the space between two individual characters or glyphs. So these examples, the top one, the kerning is set to metric, and in Adobe software they use these two terms. So metric is what's set by the type designer in the typeface. It's usually what you want to start with. And on the bottom one, the kerning is optical. So in general, I would use metric kerning for body copy. For headlines, I like to kern those manually, just adjust the space between the letters. Optical means to the eye, and this is the software having its best go at kerning. You can see it's just tightened it up, how much shorter the words kerning are on the second line than the one above, even though it's both the same font and the same point size. And if you want to practice your kerning and get better at it so you can get really sharp headlines or crafted logos, I really recommend the kerning game on the Method of Action website, and this is a fun way to do it, and because there's so many different fonts there, it really gives you a feel of how you do that with sans and with serif and display fonts, and go nuts with that. Number 7, inappropriate line length. So we don't want this to be too long or too short again. So on the first top line, this is too long and our head's kind of on a swivel like we're watching tennis at Wimbledon. We don't want the reader to do that. We want a nice scannable length, and we don't want it either to be too short like the one at the bottom where it's only like about 4 or 5 words on a line. That's too few usually. Start pushing that up to 7, you maybe go up to 12 or 15. It really depends on the context, but if you look at like websites, these are a great example. So this is how this site looked in full screen on my 5K monitor, the CNN travel website. And because it is such a large site, they haven't used that full width, because if the line length was like the full width of my screen, they know that would be really difficult to read. So they've brought in the width of this whole column so that it creates a sensible line length for the type, and you should do that too. Number 8 ill-judged leading. So leading is also known as line height on the web. So they used to put physical pieces of lead in between the lines of type, which is the way you remember how it's pronounced and what it means. And you can see here with 100% leading, so that means if your type is at 14 point, you would have 14 point leading, that's 100%. You can see that they're a little bit tight to one another, these lines, and it makes it harder to scan. But if we just open that up a little bit to 130%, which is where I like to start with body copy type, it makes it a lot easier to read. When you start getting larger than that, depending on the font, like we have at the bottom with 200, it's not always clear that that type is part of one unit. Now there are big spaces here, but within a layout, that could be strange. It's harder to read and it doesn't have the right grouping to it. So that's something to start with around 120, 130%, and then adjust it dependent on the font and the point size and the situation you're in. Number 9, inconsistent casing. This one just winds me up. We see this sort of writing on the web all the time. Which words in this title are going to be capitalized? If you see that sort of heading on like the title of a YouTube video, or the big caption on a social media post, or headline on a website, on some sites it just seems to be like at random, as I've done here, like how they make these decisions. Or in this paragraph where it's like, oh, this is the mission is a thing, so I'm going to give it a capital M, and then I'm going to put some words in capitals because, you know, they're really important and I want them to stand out. It just looks really nasty. It looks amateurish. It looks cheap. It looks pushy. Just stick to good grammar, whatever language you're working in, and generally just use sentence case. You can use title case, but be consistent with it. You can use all cap, but I would start with sentence case and just make sure your casing is consistent throughout. Even if it's something you get from copywriters and clients, it's something you can push back on, and proper grammar is always going to look better. Number 10, multiple emphasis. One emphasis is plenty, so we don't need bigger sail to be anything else than in a different weight. So making it a different weight and italic and underline and in a different color, this makes it again look cheap and nasty and pushy. You want to avoid multiple emphasis, so we rarely need bold italic when it's within a regular upright body copy. We don't really need things to be underlined and bold. Just choose an emphasis and even stick with that through paragraphs or through sections if it is necessary. You see in books, italic tends to be the only emphasis that's really used. Number 11, too many at once. Using too many different fonts in the same composition. So look at something like OpenAI's site. Here there appears to be just 2 fonts. We have, apart from the logo, we have this sans serif font, which appears to be the same way all the way through in the menu items at the top, and also this short paragraph and link. And then we have a totally different typeface, this serif typeface, for the title of safety and responsibility. And this is a nice contrasting pair, and it works because we've not got too many things going on here. But in this like butchered example, if we change the font for the body copy and the button, now we've got 4 different fonts going on plus 5 with the logo. This thing starts to look really messy. Here's the before, how it should be, and here's the messy one with too many in there. You want to limit to, I would say, 2-3 fonts. Start with that until you become, you know, a real master typographer. If you've been designing type for 40 years, you're probably not watching this video unless it's just for entertainment. If you're learning, start with 2 or 3, and I mean fonts, not just typefaces. So different font, Helvetica Bold is a different font to Helvetica Regular, whereas Helvetica and Garamond, they're 2 different typefaces. So it's a whole set of fonts that make up a typeface. And so even with that, you don't want to use too many. If you're using Helvetica Bold, Helvetica Regular, Helvetica Italic, you don't necessarily want to use Garamond Bold, Garamond Regular, Garamond Italic, you know, too many things going on. Just really limit that within a composition. And the final one, number 12, is unsuitable pairings. So we just saw an example of a nice pairing, but this can go wrong, like here, back to this display font Ultra that we talked about before. If we pair that with something like Plantain, this serif font here, it's a bit uneasy because we've got these different types of serifs, and we've got this thing Ultra, which is very much like of a time. It kind of looks like a 70s thing. It's very stylized. Then you've got this very classic serif, and it doesn't really work. So you probably want to go something that feels a lot more generic, like Unica, a sans serif. That really pairs well with anything. This is a grotesque sans serif, and that will kind of go well with everything. If you want to know more about how you choose good fonts, because this has been how to ruin one, how you actually select them, and then how you pair them together, I made a video all about that, so I'm not going to cover that again. I'm just going to encourage you to go and have a look at that. And until next time, happy designing.